Hi Sugar Snaps, welcome to the studio. Today's video is a Shibori technique video where I am experimenting with a technique using stitch work and clamping to dye fabric in a specific design. So I actually started filming this video last week and did a bunch of stitch work on fabric and some wrap techniques. The process did not end up as vibrantly rich in color as I wanted the fabric to be, but the second round turned out pretty well, so I hope you enjoy watching. I'm using double gauze or heavy gauze cotton fabric and Dharma Trading Company fiber reactive dyes. I wanted to see if I could do an exhaust bath, dye baths already made up that I'd used for previous projects, and I wanted to see if I could dye these Shibori pieces in those dye baths and just use up the last of the dye. And it probably would have worked okay, except that I used cotton thread to do my stitching, and so the dye ended up bleeding through the thread. The design ends up very faint, and the dye bath was pretty exhausted already, so the color turns out very faint. Also, I think I may have forgotten to treat this fabric pre-dyeing, so if you treat your fabric before you dye it, again, it may work, but I was just experimenting, so I was kind of moving fast through the process. So I did a half circle design on one of the pieces of fabric where I stitched half circles in just a running stitch, and then I did another one with a zigzag stitch, and then I wrapped one with large bolts. So I wrapped the bolts up in the fabric to end up with some like sunburst kinds of things. I placed them in the dye baths once they were all wrapped, and once they'd sat for about 30 minutes, I rinsed them out and untied the bundles. And as I untied them, I realized this didn't work out very well because the dye ended up being very light. There's not enough contrast between the design that I did with the wraps and the stitch work, and then it had bled through the cotton thread, and so any contrast that there would have been was really faded because it ended up being a light color of the dye color. So the designs ended up turning out, they're visible, barely on screen here, but they're not very vibrant, and I wanted something that was very contrasty and vibrant. So I set that project aside over the weekend to kind of let things percolate in my brain, did some research, and now let's dive into the outcome of that research and a successful attempt at Shibori dyeing. Good morning and welcome to attempt number 2 of trying to get the Shibori fabric technique down, or at least have something work. So I did a little research on fiber reactive dyes and Shibori, and what I came up with, or what I've seen people do, is brush the dye onto the fabric once it's all clamped or sewn. So I actually only saw this done with a clamping technique where you take 2 pieces of wood or other object that you put the fabric between, and then you clamp it over using a adjustable C-clamp so that the fabric is pressed between 2 shapes. And so I cut up some pieces of wood to be different shapes. I have some triangles, rectangles, squares, and then these larger squares. I also have some circle rounds from the craft store and just some long rectangular pieces of wood to play around with, but I really do want to try to do the stitch work. So I'm going to attempt that, but this time instead of using cotton twine or cotton thread or whatever, I found this metallic polyester. It's not a natural fiber, so it won't absorb the fiber reactive dyes, which only works on natural fibers. So I'm going to try stitching with this and then wrapping it around where I did my stitching and pulling really tight to really try to get the resist to work this time around. And oh, I also have popsicle sticks. Failure is a good teacher. It's usually still disappointing. Even if you have the mentality that failure can teach you lots of good lessons, it was still disappointing to get to the end of my fabric piece and realize that, yeah, nope, that didn't work. Got this chalk piece, I think it is chalk, and I'm gonna try this. So it's just this, and I think I'd go, yep, just circle it on like this. This supposedly will wash out. It probably will also wipe off if I touch it too much after I've drawn on the line, so I'll have to be careful. For this piece, I'm going to start with an accordion, and I think I'm going to use my mini squares, these 2 pieces of wood, and I'm going to accordion fold this back and forth smooth it down as I go. Fold accordion in the opposite direction. That's a thick bundle. Okay, and then I'll put a square on this side and a square on this side. Okay, that's pretty tight. The wood, I can hear the wood starting to crinkle or crunch. Next up, I want to do triangles. So again, I think you do accordion fold. So I'll accordion fold this a little bit bigger than my last one. And I'm kind of clamping these down really tight because I really want this to work. Okay, let's do this one like a fan. Fold it in half, and then I'll work this way, like so. So I want it to kind of come down to a point. Do I have preconceived notions of what this is going to all do? Yes, I want it to work this time. Do I know what it's going to look like? No, I don't. So, in a sense, I only have a desire of what this is going to turn out to look like. If I roll it up from the point and then just die from the outsides, there we go, there's another one. And I definitely want to play with the circles. So I think I'll do an accordion, fold it into squares, and then fold it back and forth. And then put on my circles in the middle. This little piece, I will accordion back and forth, stick it between popsicle sticks, and rubber band these tightly together. And then I'll do another set. I'll do 3 sets here. And there's that one. Now I'm going to go back to my drawn circle piece to do the stitching. And since I had a ton of stitching left to do, I decided to transition downstairs to my living room. Well, the stitching on this is done, and it's kind of a wrinkled mess because I went ahead and pulled on some of the threads as I was working, and so it's going to be harder for you to see the designs here, but I did circles inside a circle, half circles. So this is take 2, please work. Pull these tight on both the upper and lower, and then use this thread to tie the ends. Tie these here. Oh, I forgot to put my light on. I feel like today is a singing day. I just keep singing my words. There we go. It's a little chilly up here too. Also, getting tangled in my mic, and I think I've had too much coffee because my brain's like, tie very, sugar snap. Phooey Louie. Note to self, don't pull too hard on your thread. It will break. So instead I'm going to crumple this up together and tie around this entire bundle. Okay, there's that piece all tied up. I'm gonna try not to break this side. And there you go. Ah, not again! So much for stitching a second line. Ugh, this is kind of frustrating. And I have to remember that failure is good because it teaches things. Now let's see if I can do the third one without breaking this side. Instead of pulling tight, I'm just going to tie around this bundle up top here. It's all an experiment. It is all an experiment. And now we've reached the point in the process where I get to use the color. Yeah, so if you work out with any kind of dye powders, definitely wear a face mask because it will protect your respiratory system and it's chemicals, so you don't want that in your lungs or wherever it ends up. So I'm going to get a mask and probably some rubber gloves so that I don't get dyed. This time around, I remembered to put my fabric in a soda ash bath so that it would absorb as much of the pigment of the dye as possible. And then I started to mix my dyes, mixed about a teaspoon of dye with some water, and then put them in little squirt bottles because I wanted to apply the dye directly to my bundles instead of soaking them in a bowl of dye or a bin of dye. The fabric has been soaking in the soda ash mixture for longer than was necessary, so I'm going to go take it out, squeeze out the excess water, and then move back to my table and start applying the dye. And so we shall dye some fabric. Hello again. Now it be time to start to dye these pieces of fabric. It was actually harder to get all of the water out of, I keep talking like I'm from not where I'm from. The water did not all come out of this fabric. I'm not sure what to do about that. I think I'm just going to leave it as it is. I've made up 3 squirt bottles of dye. I decided to use squirt bottles like you would for tie-dye because it seemed like that might be an easier way to apply the dye than using a paintbrush. So I put them in these squirt bottles and I've made burgundy, Grecian blue, and mousse, whatever mousse is. It's still a mystery color to me, but I can't even remember if I've used it yet. We will find out what it looks like. So I think I'll start with burgundy, and I'm going to apply some dye here to the middle and just down the middle section and on the end because of the bleeding factor. I think it's going to be quite productive in bleeding through on this double gauze that I'm working with. Or the amount of dye that I'm using here is kind of guesstimate. Probably less is more in this instance because I really want some of it to not die. So I think I'll stop there and I'll bundle these up in plastic wrap so that I can then heat them or steam them in a pot. Okay, I'm back. Is it just me? Does it seem like no matter how strategic you are with organizing your studio, there's always something at the other end of the house that you need? Stick this guy in here, wrap it up, make a little bundle. I'm just going to drizzle this on the edges and assume again that it will bleed into the rest of it. Most frustrating part of the day, working with plastic wrap. I do believe this will work. I will put this stand, this is a canning stand, into the bottom of this guy. So then I'll put water in the bottom and then be able to set these in like so. And I just want to steam them so that the dye ends up hot. Let's see if I can get these all in here. Perfect. It's working up a nice steam. Yes, it worked. These turned out so much better than the first ones. Oh, I'm so excited. Okay, so I will show you the outcome and then which one it was so that you can reference. So this one, the popsicle stick one, this turned out kind of stripey and pretty fun. Not a whole lot of specific design in it, but did end up with some white. I don't think I added enough dye to this one because when I took it apart, the dye had not bled as much as I thought it was going to. So it ended up whiter than I was expecting it to. This was the square. So this turned out very nice. Lots of white again. I probably could have done a little bit more dye on this one as well. I was saying burgundy earlier, but this was actually maroon. So it ended up being kind of a bright pink since it wasn't super concentrated or didn't soak for super long. This one I did kind of at an angle, so I ended up with a cool swoosh or starburst effect. I am so stoked about this one. The circle print came out exactly how I wanted it to, exactly how it showed in the book. And as soon as I iron it, it will become even more obvious. But I'm super stoked by this one. Yeah, I think sewing it and tying it with polyester thread really helped, and then making sure everything was tied really tightly. This one, the circles showed up really nicely on the edges up here and on the bottom, but in the middle, they just kind of turned to squares. So maybe I would do a smaller piece or try to get the dye into the edges of the bundle a little bit more, but it still turned out pretty cool. And then the triangle piece is really awesome. Yeah, kind of starbursts here in the center, out from here, and then the triangles show up nice and clearly. It looks like, again, I could have added more dye. It kind of fades out here. Maybe could have gone a little more concentrated with the dye. But for a follow-up to my failed attempt, I feel like this worked out pretty well. I was actually really nervous to do the stitching because of how it turned out the first time I tried, which is why I only did this one with stitching. Now that I've tested it, I will feel more confident doing it again with more designs, just using polyester thread. So yeah, that is my Shibori experiment. In a video in the future, I'll share a project that I use these for. Thanks for journeying along with me in the ups and downs of this project. Come back soon to see what I end up doing with these pieces. I'm hoping to not just stick them in a closet, but actually create something from them, cushions or a wall hanging or something like that. It could just end up in my fabric stash. Sometimes I have a habit of making the materials and then not doing anything with it. And I'm trying to be more aggressive about creating art from the materials that I make, which is my art, because I want to challenge myself as an artist, not just to stop with the material, even though that is the exhilarating and joyous part for me, but continue on to making something that is a piece of art. For now, I will say goodbye and I'll catch you in my next video. Happy making. See you next time. Bye.